The galaxy's top Deathworld expert was terrifying her class, until the human student calmly said, "Professor, that's just Earth." Professor Kelthara adjusted her secondary breathing apparatus and surveyed the lecture hall with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. 30 cycles of teaching xenobiology at the Galactic Academy had earned her this moment, this particular lecture, the one she had been preparing for since the semester began. Today's topic: Class 12 Deathworlds, the most dangerous, hostile, downright murderous planets in the known galaxy. She was, without question, the foremost expert on theoretical Deathworld ecology in this sector. 3 published papers, 2 academic awards, 1 very flattering article in Galactic Science Quarterly that called her brilliantly cautious and admirably terrestrial averse. She wore that last compliment like a badge of honor. The students filed in with their usual mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Kelthara recognized most of them by now. There was Bloop, a gaseous Metherian who always sat near the air filtration units. Sensible choice. Really. Next to Bloop floated Tinwick, a crystalline Sherdalian whose species communicated through light refraction. Kelthara had to wear special optical filters just to understand Tinwick's questions, which were admittedly always excellent. In the middle rows sat a cluster of Vexorians, their fur changing colors based on emotional state. Currently they were displaying curious oranges and academic blues. Good signs. At least they were paying attention before the lecture even started. And then, in the very back corner, almost hidden behind a structural support column, sat the human, Riley Voss. Kelthara's mandibles twitched involuntarily. Humans were, relatively speaking, new to the Galactic Academy. Their species had only achieved faster-than-light travel about 40 standard cycles ago, which in galactic terms made them cosmic toddlers. Kelthara had nothing against humans personally, of course. They seemed pleasant enough. Polite, eager to learn. Perhaps a bit too eager if she was being honest, always asking questions that derailed carefully planned lectures. But Riley Voss, that particular human, had been nothing but quiet since the semester started, turned in assignments on time, never caused disruptions, sat in the back and took notes on one of those primitive electronic tablets humans seemed so fond of. Kelthara appreciated students who knew how to simply listen and absorb information without constant interjections. Today would be perfect. Kelthara activated the holo display with a flourish of her primary manipulator appendage. The classroom lights dimmed automatically, and a 3-dimensional rendering of a planetary system materialized in the center of the room, rotating slowly, each world tagged with classification codes and hazard warnings. "Good morning, students," Kelthara began, her voice projecting through the universal translator with practiced clarity. "Today, we discuss something that frankly most of you will never encounter in your lifetimes, something so dangerous, so utterly hostile to biological existence, that the Galactic Council has placed most of these worlds under permanent quarantine protocols." She paused for dramatic effect. The Vexorian's fur shifted to attentive yellow. "Excellent. We are talking, of course, about Class 12 Deathworlds." The holo display zoomed in on a particularly menacing-looking planet, red continents, purple oceans, atmospheric readings that made several students gasp audibly. Kelthara's internal organs swelled with professorial pride. "Now, I know what you're thinking," she continued, pacing in front of the display. "You're thinking, surely Professor Kelthara is exaggerating. Surely no planet could be as dangerous as the literature suggests. After all, we live in an age of advanced technology, medical science, protective equipment. How bad could a planet actually be?" She let that question hang in the air like a toxic gas cloud. "The answer, my dear students, is worse than you can possibly conceive. A Class 12 Deathworld is not simply inhospitable, it is actively, aggressively, almost maliciously hostile to life. These planets don't just make survival difficult, they make survival a constant, exhausting battle against the environment itself." Kelthara manipulated the holo display to show a gravity readout. The numbers made Bloop's gaseous form ripple with distress. "First, let us consider gravity," she said, highlighting the data with a laser pointer. "Most civilized species evolved on planets with gravity ranging from 0.6 to 1.2 standard units. Comfortable, manageable. Our bodies developed in harmony with these conditions, but a Class 12 Deathworld, we're talking about gravity levels of 1.5, sometimes even 2 standard units." Tinwick's crystalline structure refracted a confused orange light. Kelthara translated quickly. "Yes, Tinwick, you heard correctly. 2 standard units. Imagine, if you will, every single movement requiring twice the normal effort. your cardiovascular system straining constantly, your skeletal structure compressing under relentless downward force. Growing up in such an environment would require bone density that most species simply cannot achieve without severe genetic modification. She pulled up images of theoretical Deathworld fauna. The renderings were, she had to admit, quite terrifying. Her research assistant had done excellent work. Now, combine that crushing gravity with predatory lifeforms that evolved specifically to thrive in such conditions. We're talking about creatures with muscle density and structural reinforcement that would make our strongest species look fragile by comparison. Apex predators weighing hundreds of kilograms moving with speed that defies their mass, equipped with natural weapons sharp enough to pierce standard protective gear. One of the Vexorians raised a paw, fur flashing nervous purple. Kelthara acknowledged with a nod. Professor, you said theoretical Deathworld fauna. Does that mean we don't have actual examples? Kelthara's mandibles clicked in what her species considered a smile. An astute observation. Yes, most Class 12 Deathworlds have never been properly surveyed due to the extreme danger involved. However, long-range analysis and atmospheric sampling have given us considerable data to work with. We can extrapolate with high confidence what life forms might exist on such planets. She changed the display again, showing atmospheric composition charts that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Beyond gravity and predators, consider the atmosphere itself. A proper Class 12 Deathworld doesn't simply have breathable air. It has air that actively works against you. High oxygen content leading to increased fire risk, extreme weather patterns with temperature fluctuations that would require constant environmental suit adjustments, precipitation that isn't just water falling from the sky, but massive violent storms capable of destroying settlements. Kelthara was really hitting her stride now. This was what she lived for, the perfect combination of scientific rigor and dramatic presentation. She could see the students hanging on every word, their various biological fear responses activating appropriately, and we haven't even discussed the smaller threats yet. She continued, pulling up microscopic imagery, bacterial life, viral agents, parasitic organisms. On a true Deathworld, even the microscopic life wants you dead. Your immune system, developed over millions of cycles on a civilized planet, would be completely overwhelmed within days, possibly hours. She let that sink in, watching the horror dawn across multiple species' facial equivalents. So, when we talk about Class 12 Deathworlds, we're not simply discussing unpleasant camping destinations. We're discussing planets that represent everything hostile about the universe concentrated into one nightmarish sphere of rock and violence. Planets where the very concept of childhood would be unthinkable, because no juvenile organism could possibly survive long enough to reach maturity. Kelthara turned off the laser pointer and faced her students directly. This is why the Galactic Council maintains strict quarantine protocols. This is why only the most advanced military units with specialized training even approach these worlds. This is why you as future xenobiologists must understand the theoretical frameworks of Deathworld ecology without ever, and I mean ever, setting foot on one. She paused, basking in the weight of her words. Now, let's begin with specific environmental factors, starting with. A hand went up in the back of the classroom. Professor Kelthara's mandibles froze mid-gesture. The human, Riley Voss, the quiet one, had her hand raised, sitting there in the back corner, looking not horrified or fascinated or even particularly concerned, just politely attentive with her hand in the air. Kelthara's primary heart sank just a little bit, but she was a professional, 30 cycles of teaching. She could handle one student question. Yes, Riley, you have a question already? The human lowered her hand slightly and spoke in that strangely flat accent humans carried even through universal translators. Not really a question, Professor. More of a comment, I guess. Please proceed. Riley Voss stood up slowly, tablet in hand, and said 5 words that would haunt Professor Kelthara for the rest of her academic career. Stop. You're describing my childhood. Professor Kelthara's secondary breathing apparatus wheezed slightly. A nervous tick she thought she had conquered decades ago. She recalibrated her translator implant, certain she had misheard. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Riley Voss remained standing, looking genuinely apologetic, which somehow made it worse. I said you're describing my childhood, like pretty accurately, except you're making it sound way more dramatic than it actually was. The classroom went silent. Even Bloop stopped his usual ambient humming. Tinwick's light refraction flickered between confused violet and alarmed red. Kelthara's mandibles worked soundlessly for a moment before her professorial instincts kicked in. Control the classroom. Maintain authority. This was probably just a misunderstanding. Humans were known for their bizarre sense of humor after all. Riley, I appreciate your contribution, but I assure you the Class 12 Deathworld conditions are not comparable to any civilized upbringing. These are theoretical extremes that Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld though, right? Riley interrupted, not rudely, just matter-of-factly. I checked the registry when I enrolled. We're listed as quarantine-level hazard with a whole bunch of warning tags. Kelthara's primary and secondary hearts began beating out of sync. Well, yes, technically, but that's clearly an administrative error that hasn't been corrected. The classification system was established before human contact, and obviously your species has survived, so the rating must be inflated due to insufficient data. She was rambling. 30 cycles of teaching and she was rambling like a first-year graduate assistant. Riley sat back down, which Kelthara took as a small victory. Time to regain control. She turned back to the holo display, pulling up her next section with perhaps more force than necessary. Moving on, Kelthara said firmly. Let's discuss survival scenarios. Imagine, if you will, being placed in a wilderness environment with minimal supplies. No communication technology, no extraction team, no protective gear. Just you, the hostile terrain, and whatever you can carry. On a Class 12 Deathworld, this scenario would be considered a death sentence. Survival beyond 48 hours would be statistically improbable. Riley's hand went up again. Kelthara closed all three of her eyes, counted to 5, opened them again. The hand was still up. Yes, Riley? That's just camping. I'm sorry, what? Camping. Riley repeated, completely earnest. We do that for fun. Usually for weekends, sometimes longer. My family used to go camping every summer in the mountains. We'd pack some food, water filtration tablets, a tent if we were feeling fancy, and just, exist outside for a while. One of the Vexorians made a choking sound. Their fur flashed through panicked purple into what Kelthara recognized as traumatized gray. You did this recreationally? Kelthara asked, her voice rising an octave. For enjoyment?
I mean, yeah.
It's pretty normal. Kids do it through this organization called Scouts. They give you badges and everything. I got one for starting fires without matches, one for identifying edible plants, one for water safety, one for starting fires. Bloop's gaseous form contracted into a dense, anxious sphere, without proper equipment, in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. Riley nodded enthusiastically. Oh yeah, it's like a basic survival skill. You use friction or sparks from rocks. Takes practice, but it's not that hard once you get the technique down. Kelthara pulled up her next slide with shaking manipulator appendages. This was fine. This was salvageable. She just needed to get more specific, more extreme. All right, let's escalate the scenario, she said, trying to sound confident and landing somewhere around desperate. Imagine a Deathworld predator. We're talking about a creature weighing, say, 200 kilograms, equipped with natural weapons, sharp teeth, powerful jaw capable of pursuing prey at high speeds. An encounter with such a creature would require immediate evacuation protocols and armed security personnel. Riley's hand shot up before Kelthara even finished her sentence. Riley, please tell me you haven't. Oh, we have a bunch of those. Bears mostly. Sometimes mountain lions depending on where you camp. My uncle actually fought off a bear that got into our food supply once. Hit it with a cooking pan until it ran away. He tells that story at every family gathering now. He hit it. Tinwick's light refraction went completely white, the crystalline equivalent of a system shutdown. With a cooking implement? I mean, it was either that or let it eat all our supplies, Riley said with a shrug that made 3 students flinch. Bear skulls are pretty thick though. He had to dent the pan pretty good before it decided we weren't worth the trouble. Kelthara sat down. She hadn't planned to sit down. She had 17 more slides prepared, but her lower support appendages simply stopped functioning properly and sitting became less of a choice and more of an involuntary collapse. Your uncle, Kelthara said slowly, carefully, engaged in physical combat with a 200-kilogram apex predator, and survived, using kitchenware. Well yeah, Uncle Jerry is kind of intense though. He used to be in the Marines. That's like military training. Most people would probably just make noise and back away slowly. Usually the bears don't want to fight, they just want food. You're supposed to hang your supplies in trees so they can't reach them, but Jerry forgot that night because he'd been drinking. He was intoxicated during this encounter? I mean, it was vacation. Professor Kelthara looked around her classroom desperately, hoping somehow that this was an elaborate prank. Perhaps a hazing ritual for new professors she hadn't heard about. But no. Her students looked just as disturbed as she felt. The Vexorians had huddled together into a single mass of gray fur. Bloop had condensed into the smallest form she'd ever seen him achieve. Tinwick hadn't produced a single light refraction in over a minute, and Riley Voss just sat there looking helpful. Kelthara stood back up on shaky appendages. She was a professional. She had prepared for this lecture extensively. She would not be derailed by one human with apparently criminal levels of understatement. Fine, she said, pulling up a new slide showing atmospheric data. Let's discuss environmental conditions. Temperature fluctuations on a Class 12 Deathworld can range from 50 degrees below freezing to 50 degrees above optimal biological function. Within a single planetary rotation, this kind of thermal stress would require constant shelter and climate-controlled suits. Riley opened her mouth. Kelthara held up a manipulator appendage. Please don't. It's just that we have deserts and tundras and... I said please don't. But Riley was already going. Arizona gets up to 47 degrees Celsius in summer. I had a friend who lived there and she said you could cook eggs on the sidewalk, which honestly sounds unsanitary, but people did it anyway. And then in Alaska it drops to -40 sometimes. My cousin moved to Fairbanks for work and he said his car battery froze solid twice last winter. Humans live in both places permanently. There are cities and everything. Your species, Kelthara said slowly, quietly, dangerously, has voluntarily established permanent settlements in environments with 100-degree temperature variations. Well, we put up buildings with heating and cooling systems. We're not total idiots about it. One of the Vexorians raised a trembling paw. Riley, when you say you went camping in the mountains, were these mountains located in the habitable zones of your planet? The temperate regions with minimal environmental fluctuation? Oh no. We usually went to the Rockies. Pretty serious elevation. Temperature drops fast at night. You need a good sleeping bag or you'll get hypothermia. Lost a toenail to frostbite once when I was 12 because I didn't dry my socks properly. You lost a body part? Just the nail. It grew back weird, but it's fine now, see? Riley started to remove her boot. Please keep your footwear on, Kelthara shrieked, abandoning all professorial dignity. Riley looked genuinely confused. I was just going to show. We don't need a visual demonstration of your childhood disfigurement, thank you so very much. Kelthara's mandibles were clicking uncontrollably now, a stress response she hadn't experienced since her doctoral dissertation defense. She pulled up another slide, this one showing gravitational force comparisons. Safe territory. Mathematics didn't lie. The gravity on Earth is... Let me check. She manipulated the display, pulling up human homeworld data. The number materialized in front of her. 1.0 standard units. That's actually perfectly average. How is that? The database said. Oh, standard units are based on Earth gravity. Riley said helpfully. We're the baseline because we were one of the first spacefaring species that participated in the Measurement Standardization Committee. You're the baseline? Yeah. Apparently it caused some controversy. But the Galactic Council decided to pick one reference planet and Earth was convenient at the time. Professor Kelthara stared at her hollow display. 30 cycles of teaching, 3 published papers, 2 academic awards. And somehow, despite all of that, she had never questioned why standard gravitational units felt slightly heavier than comfortable. Because they were based on a death world. The galaxy had standardized measurements around a planet that was actively hostile to most civilized life. Class dismissed, Kelthara whispered. But Professor, we still have 45 minutes left. Class dismissed. Professor Kelthara did not dismiss class. She couldn't. She wouldn't. 30 cycles of teaching had taught her one immutable truth. Never let the student see you break. Never surrender the lecture hall. Never admit defeat in the face of challenging questions, no matter how reality-shattering those questions might be. So instead, she did what any cornered academic would do. She escalated. You know what? Fine. Fine, Kelthara said, her manipulator appendages flying across the hollow display controls with manic energy. We're going to speed through this. We're going to cover every single nightmare scenario in the curriculum. And you're all going to see just how theoretical and extreme these situations actually are. She pulled up a rapid-fire series of images. Storms, floods, geological instability, each one worse than the last. Scenario 7. Kelthor announced, her voice taking on a slightly unhinged quality. Massive atmospheric disturbances generating wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. Theoretical models suggest these storms could level entire settlements, uproot vegetation, turn debris into projectiles. Survival would require underground bunkers with reinforced structural integrity. Riley's hand went up. We call those hurricanes and tornadoes, Riley said before Kelthara could even acknowledge her. The Midwest gets tornadoes pretty regularly during spring and summer. There's this whole thing called Tornado Alley. People have storm cellars. Some folks even chase the tornadoes for research. Or fun, sometimes both. For fun. Bloop's gaseous form was now approximately the size of a small fruit. Why would recreational tornado observation be a thing that exists? Storm photography is pretty popular. You can get amazing pictures if you don't get too close. Well, and if you survive. Kelthara didn't even pause. She was already pulling up the next scenario, her movements becoming more frantic. Scenario 12. Tectonic instability causing ground displacement events measuring 7.0 or higher on the seismic scale. Buildings collapse. Infrastructure fails. Entire cities rendered uninhabitable in moments. Earthquakes. Yeah, Riley nodded. Japan has building codes for those. San Francisco too. You engineer for it. My architecture professor at community college before I came here said it's just part of responsible construction in seismically active zones. California gets hundreds of small quakes every year. Hundreds. Most of them you can't even feel. The big ones are scary though. We had disaster drills in school. Get under your desk. Cover your head. Wait for the shaking to stop. One of the Vexorians made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a prayer. Kelthara pulled up another slide. Then another. She was clicking through her carefully prepared presentation at a pace that would have made her dissertation advisor weep. Scenario 19. Volcanic activity releasing superheated gases and molten rock. Toxic atmospheric conditions. Pyroclastic flows moving at 700 kilometers per hour. Hawaii is literally a chain of volcanic islands and people vacation there, Riley said, leaning back in her chair now, apparently settling in. The volcanoes are tourist attractions. You can hike up some of them. Take pictures of the lava flows. There are warning systems when they get active, but mostly people just deal with it. Real estate is actually pretty expensive there despite the whole active volcano situation. They pay extra to live near the volcanic death zones. Ocean views are nice. Professor Kelthara's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they generated a sound not unlike a distressed printer. She abandoned the hollow display entirely and just started listing scenarios from memory, her voice rising with each one. Flash floods, avalanches, lightning storms, sinkholes, blizzards, heat waves, drought, tsunamis, wildfires spreading across thousands of square kilometers. Yes, check, had one near my hometown last year, definitely yes. Australia has issues with those, and California and… Stop talking. Riley stopped talking. But she didn't stop looking sympathetic, which was somehow infinitely worse. A small voice piped up from the middle of the classroom. Pibblewirth, a Quelvan who had barely spoken all semester. His species resembled, for lack of a better description, a very anxious potato with ice talks. They came from a planet with 0.75 standard gravity, no tectonic activity, weather patterns that varied by approximately 3 degrees annually, and a complete absence of predators larger than what humans would call a hamster. Professor Kelthara, Pibblewirth said, his voice quavering. I have a question. Please, Pibblewirth, please let it be a normal question about cellular biology or atmospheric composition. It's about my own species, actually. Pibblewirth's eye stalks drooped. We consider ourselves reasonably robust. We have mandatory physical conditioning. We train for emergency scenarios. I personally completed a 15-kilometer walk last year and received a civic commendation for exceptional endurance. Riley made a sound that might have been a suppressed cough. But listening to this, Pibblewirth continued, his eye stalks now pointing in different directions, a sign of severe distress in Quelvans. Listening to Riley describe her childhood as casually surviving conditions that we would classify as apocalyptic extinction events, I have to ask, and please understand this comes from a place of genuine existential confusion, what exactly have we been doing with our evolution? Are we just soft? Are Quelvans just, cosmically speaking, embarrassingly fragile? Pibblewirth, no, you're not. I received a medal for walking 15 kilometers, Pibblewirth wailed. Riley lost a toenail to frostbite at age 12 and she describes it as a minor inconvenience that resulted from improper sock maintenance. The other Vexorians murmured agreement. One of them spoke up, flashing through a spectrum of depressed colors. My species has an entire holiday celebrating the one time our ancestors survived a storm that dropped temperatures by 10 degrees over 3 days. We built monuments, we teach it in history classes, and humans just what? Put on an extra layer and complain about the weather. Pretty much, Riley confirmed. Kelthera slumped against her desk, her carefully constructed lecture, her pride and joy, the culmination of 30 cycles of research and academic excellence, lay in smoking ruins around her. Every theoretical scenario she had presented as the absolute extreme of planetary hostility had been met with some variation of yes, we have that, we built cities there. Riley, Kelthara said quietly, tell me honestly, is there anything at all that you consider genuinely dangerous on Earth? Any environment that humans avoid? Any natural phenomenon that makes your species reconsider settlement patterns? Riley thought about this for a moment, her face scrunched up in concentration. I mean, we don't really set up permanent bases in the middle of active war zones or nuclear test sites. But that's more human-caused danger than environmental. Oh, and there's this place called the Door to Hell in Turkmenistan, which is a natural gas crater that's been on fire for like 50 years. We don't build houses right next to that. But mostly because it would be inconvenient, not because we couldn't. The Door to Hell, Kelthera repeated flatly. Yeah, tourists visit it though. You can camp nearby. I've seen pictures. Of course you can. Of course tourists visit the Door to Hell. Why wouldn't they? Why would anything make sense anymore? Tinwick finally produced a light refraction, a deep philosophical blue. His translated voice emerged from the classroom speakers. Professor, I believe I speak for the entire class when I say that this lecture has been deeply educational, but perhaps not in the way you intended. We have learned that the theoretical frameworks we've been studying are, in fact, just a description of Riley's spring break destinations. Several students made sounds of agreement. Pibblesworth had curled into a tight ball and was rocking slightly. Kelthera looked at her remaining slides. Poisonous flora, venomous fauna, parasitic organisms, bacterial infections. She had so much material left, so many carefully researched nightmare scenarios, and somehow, she already knew exactly how Riley would respond to every single one. Professor Kelthara stared at her holoscreen for a long moment, watching her meticulously crafted presentation mock her with its remaining slatings. She could continue, she could push through, she could maintain the pretense that this lecture had any salvageable dignity left, or she could finally ask the question that had been building in her primary brain for the past hour. Riley, Kelthara said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had just watched their life's work crumble into academic dust. Does your species actually recognize that Earth is dangerous? At all? Even a little bit? Riley tilted her head, considering this with an expression that suggested she'd never really thought about it before. I mean, not really? Like we know there are hazards, but that's just normal life stuff. Every planet has weather and animals and geology, right? We just deal with it. Adapt, build better houses, invent new technology, move to different areas if one spot gets too annoying. Too annoying, Kelthara repeated. Mount Vesuvius burying Pompeii was too annoying. Well, they didn't have the seismic monitoring equipment we have now, so yeah, that was unfortunate. We've gotten better at predicting eruptions since then. Most. Bloop managed to expand slightly from his compressed terror state. Riley, when you say mostly, what percentage of accuracy are we discussing? I don't know. Like 80%? 90%? Volcanoes are tricky, but we evacuate people when we think something big is coming. Usually everyone gets out fine. Usually? Riley shrugged, and that shrug contained more casual acceptance of mortality than Kelthara had encountered in 3 decades of teaching xenobiology. Something occurred to Kelthara then. Something that should have been obvious from the beginning but had been obscured by her own academic arrogance. She pulled up the Galactic Registry database, her manipulator appendages moving with deliberate slowness now, and typed in a simple search query. Earth. Sol system. Classification status. The results materialized in front of the entire class. Planet designation. Earth. Terra. Classification Class 12 Deathworld. Quarantine status. Active. Hazard level extreme. Approved visitation. Restricted to species with advanced survival training and full environmental suits. Settlement recommendation none. Prohibited except for native population. Native population status, 8.1 billion individuals. Widespread planetary distribution, technologically advanced, spacefaring capability achieved. Advisory notes. Native species demonstrates extreme adaptability and durability. Caution advised in physical confrontations. Do not engage in strength competitions. Do not challenge to endurance activities. Do not accept invitations to camping trips. See Incident Report 3084-7B for D. The classroom went silent. Even the environmental system seemed to hold their breath. 8 billion. Tinwick's translated voice finally whispered. 8 billion humans. Living on a quarantine-level hazard planet, with widespread distribution. Oh yeah, we're pretty much everywhere, Riley confirmed cheerfully. All 7 continents, Arctic research stations, desert communities, coastal cities, mountain towns. We've got people living at crazy altitudes, below sea level, in the middle of rainforests where it rains like 300 days a year. My great aunt lives in Alaska where it's dark for 2 months straight in winter. She says it's peaceful. Pibblewurth made a sound like a deflating balloon. One of the Vexorians raised a shaking paw. Riley, let me make certain I understand this correctly. Your species, your entire species, lives on a planet so dangerous that the Galactic Council has forbidden anyone else from visiting without military-grade protection, and you've colonized every available environment, and you consider this what? Normal? I mean, yeah? Where else would we live? Anywhere else. The Vexorian shouted, fur flashing through panicked ultraviolet. Literally any other planet in the galaxy would be safer. Most species emigrate from hazardous worlds the moment they achieve space travel. It's the first thing civilized planets do. Leave the death trap behind, find somewhere comfortable. Riley looked genuinely surprised. But Earth is home. It's got all our stuff, our cities and farms and infrastructure. Plus, the biodiversity is supposed to be pretty special. We've got millions of species. The nature documentaries are amazing. The nature documentaries, Kelthara said, her voice flat. You film your planetary hazards for entertainment. Well yeah, people love that stuff. There's this whole streaming category for it. Kelthara closed the database. She straightened her posture as much as her species anatomy allowed. She looked at her students, this collection of civilized beings from reasonable planets with sensible environmental conditions, and made an executive decision. New homework assignment, she announced. Everyone will write a 5,000-word essay on their own planet's environmental conditions. Focus on what makes your homeworld safe, stable, and suitable for long-term habitation. Do not reference Earth. Do not compare your planet to Earth. Do not even think about Earth while writing this essay. Pretend Earth doesn't exist. This assignment is due in 1 standard week. The students nodded eagerly, grateful for anything that resembled normal academic work. Riley raised her hand. No, Kelthara said immediately. I was just going to ask if I could do my presentation next week on Earth animals. I've got some great videos of Australian wildlife that I think the class would find educational. There's this one spider that... No, absolutely not. Denied. Rejected. I'm formally banning that topic from this classroom for the remainder of the semester. But Professor Riley, I have seen the advisory notes. I know about Incident Report 3084-7B. I don't know what happened during that particular camping trip, but I know it resulted in 3 Galactic Council members requiring psychological counseling and 1 requesting early retirement. So no, you may not present on Australian wildlife or any other Earth fauna, flora, or geological features.
Riley sighed but nodded.
Okay, that's fair. Uncle Jerry probably shouldn't have brought the spider to the diplomatic summit anyway. It wasn't even one of the dangerous ones. Class dismissed, Kelthara said. Actually dismissed this time. Go. Leave. Process your existential terror in private like civilized beings. The students fled with varying speeds depending on their locomotive capabilities. Pibblewurth had to be gently rolled toward the exit by 2 concerned Vexorians. Riley packed up her tablet, gave Professor Kelthara a friendly wave, and walked out humming something that the universal translator unhelpfully identified as the circle of life. Professor Kelthara stood alone in her classroom, surrounded by the ruins of her carefully planned lecture, and wondered if it was too late to switch her research focus to something safe and predictable, like quantum mechanics, or temporal paradoxes. Anything really that didn't involve humans and their terrifying, inexplicable insistence on calling a Deathworld home.